The server door slammed shut, locked. My own security system just turned against me. 3 hours until the merger meeting, and Marcus Sterling has vanished. The black sedan's headlights cut through the parking garage as I grab the only weapon I have, a laptop bag and a rusted car jack. They want the hardware token in my pocket, but I'm not giving it up without a fight. My own lead developer just sold me out. The system's counting down, and if I don't move now, everything I built gets erased. Permanently. The air inside the concrete subterranean level tasted of stale exhaust and damp limestone. Elias Thorne leaned against the hood of his sedan, his neck cramping as he stared into the blue glare of the laptop screen. A bead of sweat rolled from his hairline, stinging his eye, but he ignored it. His fingers danced across the keys, entering the final sequence for the handshake that would link his portable terminal to the heart of Nexus Stream. Instead of the familiar green prompt, the screen flickered. A crimson banner slashed across the terminal. Access revoked. He tapped the escape key. Once, twice. The cursor blinked back at him, a mocking white pulse. The humid silence of the garage amplified the hum of the overhead fluorescent tubes. Elias reached for his pocket and pulled out his vintage mechanical stopwatch. Click, click. He started the timer. He needed to know exactly how long this failure would cost him. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose with a sharp, forceful finger and dialed Marcus Sterling's number. "Pick up, Marcus. Do not do this," Elias muttered, his voice flat and precise. The call went straight to a digital hiss. No ringing, no voicemail. Elias pulled the phone away, staring at the signal bars. Full strength. He dialed again, this time through the secure line they had built together. A mechanical voice cut him off before the first second passed. "This number is no longer in service." Panic tightened around his ribs like a physical band, a variable he hadn't factored into his morning. He slammed the laptop shut, the crack echoing off the low ceiling. The smell of hot copper, the internal fan struggling against the heat, wafted toward him. Marcus hadn't disappeared. Marcus had purged him. Elias stood in the shadows of the parking bay, the heavy dampness of his shirt clinging to his spine, listening for the sound of approaching tires on the ramp above. He looked at his stopwatch. 1 minute and 12 seconds. The cracks were already forming. The silence of the garage was suddenly shattered by the aggressive squeal of tires against smooth concrete. A black sedan rounded the corner of level P3, its headlights cutting through the gloom like the eyes of a predator. It didn't slow down for the speed bumps. It accelerated. Elias shoved his laptop into his messenger bag, the metal teeth of the zipper grinding as he forced it shut. 2 men stepped out of the vehicle before it had even fully stopped. They weren't wearing suits. They wore heavy work jackets and carried thick, rusted tire irons that looked heavy enough to crush a skull. They didn't announce themselves. They didn't ask for his wallet. They moved with a synchronized, predatory intent that told Elias they weren't muggers. They were cleaners. Elias backed away, his heels clicking against the oil-stained floor. His heart hammered at 120 beats per minute. Inefficient, he noted internally. As the first man lunged, swinging the iron bar in a wide, whistling arc, Elias swung his messenger bag. The heavy laptop inside took the brunt of the blow with a sickening thud of plastic and metal. The impact vibrated up Elias's arm, numbing his shoulder. He didn't wait for a second swing. He dived toward a nearby SUV perched on a hydraulic jack stand, a vehicle mid-repair. With a desperate kick, he struck the release lever. The heavy machine groaned, the metal teeth of the jack slipping, and the 2-ton mass of steel crashed to the floor. The sound was like a thunderclap in the confined space. The dust and floor grit erupted into the air, creating a momentary gray curtain. The goons hesitated, startled by the mechanical violence. Elias turned and bolted for the heavy steel door marked Server Room 3A. He reached the heavy door, his fingers fumbling with the biometric scanner. It glowed red. Access denied. He didn't have time for a bypass. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, high-voltage device he'd built for testing circuit breakers. He jammed the metal prongs into the sensor's casing. A sharp spark erupted, smelling of scorched ozone, and the magnetic lock groaned and clicked open. Inside, the server closet was a bone-chilling 55 degrees. The air was stripped of moisture, making every breath feel like a dry rasp in his throat. The blue LEDs of the server racks blinked in a frantic, uncoordinated rhythm. Elias ignored the main terminal. He knew Marcus would have changed the master passwords. Instead, he dropped to his knees behind rack 4. His fingers, numb from the cold, clawed at the floor-mounted security box. He pulled a small silver hardware token from the hidden compartment, the physical heartbeat of the entire system. Without this physical key, the digital kingdom Marcus was trying to steal was incomplete. He shoved the cold metal into his pocket, the sharp edges biting into his palm, and slipped out the rear service exit just as the heavy thud of fists began to pound on the front door. Elias emerged into the blinding Austin sunlight, the heat hitting him like a physical wall. He needed an ally. He needed Sarah Johnson. As the lead developer, she held the secondary override codes. He navigated the gridlocked streets, dodging tourists and construction cranes, until he reached the glass and steel monolith that housed Nexus Stream. He found Sarah in her office, her oversized hoodie pulled tight around her. She was staring at her phone, her thumb moving in a rhythmic pattern. Elias didn't knock. "Sarah, I need the master overrides. Marcus has locked the primary gates. We have to divert the flow before the board meeting," Elias said, his voice clipped. Sarah didn't look up. Her eyes remained fixed on her screen. "I am sorry, Elias. Entry 4113. Betrayed Elias. Severity, fatal." Elias froze. "What are you talking about?" "Marcus offered me a retention bonus," she whispered, finally looking at him. Her eyes were rimmed with red, hidden behind thick mascara. "It is more money than I would see in 10 years. He said you were going to burn the company down to save your ego. He said I was part of the vision now." "The vision is a lie, Sarah. He is liquidating the assets. Give me the codes." "I cannot do that," she said, her voice trembling. She reached for the desk phone. "I already gave him the master keys. He told me to call security if you showed up. I am so sorry, Elias. I really am." She pressed a button on the console. A sharp, rhythmic chime echoed in the hallway. Sarah's apology was the sound of a trap closing. Elias looked at her, seeing the spreadsheet of her guilt projected in her vacant stare. He had treated her like a reliable variable in his equation, but Marcus had treated her like a person with a price. "You are leaking seconds, Sarah," Elias said, his voice devoid of emotion. "And you just ran out." He turned and ran, as the heavy footfalls of security guards began to thud against the designer carpet of the executive wing. He didn't take the elevator. He took the stairs, his lungs burning as he descended 20 flights of stairs. He burst through the lobby, past the startled receptionist, and out into the chaotic hum of Congress Avenue. He reached his truck, parked 3 blocks away, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He climbed inside, the interior smelling of old coffee and upholstery cleaner. He jammed the key into the ignition. Nothing. The dashboard remained dark. No lights, no chime, no hum of the fuel pump. He tried again, turning the key until the metal nearly snapped. A small message flickered on the center console screen, a final taunt from Marcus. Vehicle subscription expired. Remote lockout active. Marcus hadn't just taken the company. He had taken Elias's ability to move. At that moment, a citywide data surge, orchestrated by the very platform Elias had built, hit the local network. Every phone on the street began to chime. Navigation apps spun in circles, showing cars driving through buildings. The digital map of Austin turned into a jagged mess of red lines and error messages. Elias was stranded in a city that had been turned into a technological labyrinth designed to keep him from the board meeting. He abandoned the truck and began to run. He took the back alleys, hoping to avoid the main thoroughfares where Marcus's reach was strongest. The brick walls were slick with an oily grime, and the stench of rotting citrus from overflowing dumpsters made his stomach churn. As he turned a sharp corner into a narrow passage behind a row of warehouses, a man stepped out from behind a stack of shipping pallets. He wore a cheap, strained suit and carried a leather folder. "Elias Thorne?" the man asked. He let out a long, theatrical sigh and rubbed his lower back. "You're making this real hard on my sciatica, kid." It was Robert Miller, a process server who looked more like a retired prize fighter. He didn't reach for a pen. He reached for a black plastic device on his belt. The heavy, rattling sigh from his chest was the only warning Elias got before the man lunged. Elias dodged the first thrust of the taser, the blue arc of electricity hissing in the damp air like a disturbed snake. "I do not have time for legal theatrics," Elias snapped. "It ain't theater when the spark hits," Robert grunted, swinging the taser again. Elias backed up, his eyes darting for an exit. He was cornered. He saw a heavy industrial trash bin, the kind made of thick, reinforced plastic, sitting on a slight incline. As Robert moved in for a final strike, Elias threw his weight against the bin. The wheels groaned and then caught, the heavy mass rolling forward with surprising speed. It caught Robert in the midsection, pinning him against the rough brick wall. The air left the man's lungs in a pained wheeze. The taser clattered to the ground, sparking harmlessly in a puddle. Elias didn't stay to hear the man's groan. He snatched the taser, shoved it into the bin to disable the battery, and scrambled up a nearby construction scaffold. From the height of the second story, he could see the roof of the Gilded Oak restaurant 3 blocks away. He had 12 minutes. Subverted beat 2.4. Elias crouched on the cold metal planks of the scaffolding, the wind whipping his hair into his eyes. He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out a handheld diagnostic tool, a rugged device he'd built to sniff out hardware failures in the field. He connected it to the silver hardware token he'd snatched from the server room. Phase 1. Build hope. Elias's fingers moved with a sudden, renewed confidence. This was his world. Marcus could buy people, but he couldn't change the laws of logic. The token was the root of the entire Nexus stream architecture. By analyzing its internal logs, Elias could see every data packet Marcus was moving. He would find the evidence of the illegal lockout, present it to the board, and the merger would be dead on arrival. The logic was sound, the evidence was physical, and for the first time since the garage, Elias felt like he was holding the winning hand. Phase 2. False positive. The screen of the diagnostic tool flickered to life. A stream of data began to flow, bright, clean lines of code. Elias saw the routing paths. Marcus was moving the company's core intellectual property, the very brain of the system, into a secure, off-site vault. "I have you," Elias whispered. He saw the destination, a high-security RICO Shield trust account. It was a protective legal structure designed to freeze assets during a hostile takeover. Marcus wasn't stealing the company. He was protecting it from Elias's instability. The board would see this as a brilliant defensive move. Elias's shoulders dropped. The tension in his jaw relaxed. If he could just show the board that he could still interface with this shield, they would realize he was still the essential architect. Phase 3. The crack. He scrolled deeper into the routing logs. Something was wrong. The data wasn't just being stored, it was being fragmented. The Rico shield wasn't a vault, it was a shredder. He noticed a tiny, recurring string of text in the destination header. Cayman-Shell-Beta-9. His brow furrowed. That wasn't a legal trust. It was a ghost. A cold prickle danced across his skin as he realized the protective code was actually a one-way bridge to an offshore account. Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. The screen suddenly turned a violent, pulsing red. Trap wire activated. Elias tried to pull the plug, but the diagnostic tool locked onto the token. A message scrolled across the screen in Marcus's digital signature. "Thanks for the keys, Elias. I couldn't have authorized the offshore transfer without your physical hardware signature. You just signed the check for me." Asterisk. The truth hit like a physical blow to the stomach. The hardware token wasn't just a key. It was the final authorization Marcus needed to prove the founder had approved the liquidation. By connecting his diagnostic tool, Elias had inadvertently provided the digital thumbprint Marcus lacked. The evidence of theft was actually the mechanism of the theft itself. And Elias had just pulled the trigger. He hadn't found a way to stop the merger. He had just legally and technically finalized his own ruin. His knees felt weak, the metal scaffolding beneath him seeming to tilt as the weight of his own smart move crushed his last bit of hope. He was now the primary suspect in his own company's disappearance. He didn't have time to mourn. He shoved the now useless tool into his bag and began to run again. The Silicon Valley merger was a fraud, a smokescreen to keep the board looking at the gold on the horizon, while Marcus funneled the actual value into a black hole. He reached the Gilded Oak as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The restaurant was an oppressive fortress of dark mahogany and heavy velvet. Outside, 2 men in crisp white shirts and tactical vests stood guard. They were off-duty Austin PD, their eyes scanning the street with the practiced paranoia of men who knew exactly who they were looking for. 1, 2, clear. One of them muttered into a lapel mic as a couple entered. Elias didn't even try the front door. He circled the building, his shoes splashing through a puddle of stagnant water that smelled of grease and old bone. He found a service entrance where a delivery truck was unloading crates of expensive wine. He slipped past a distracted chef. The kitchen, a chaotic inferno of clanging pans and shouting voices. The air smelled of scorched butter and expensive spices, a scent so thick it felt like it was coating his tongue. He burst through the double doors into the private dining room. The board members were all there, seated around a table of polished oak. Marcus Sterling stood at the head, his hair molded into a perfect plastic wave. He was mid-sentence, his voice a rolling tide of charm. "Imagine the legacy we are carving." "The legacy is a lie," Elias shouted, his voice cracking. The room went silent. Thomas Clark, the board chair, looked up, his fake booming laugh dying in his throat. Marcus didn't flinch. He slowly began to crack his knuckles, left pinky to thumb, then right thumb to pinky. The rhythmic pop, pop, pop was the only sound in the room. Marcus's bodyguard, a mountain of a man named David, moved before Elias could take another step. He grabbed Elias by the collar of his damp shirt and slammed him against a sideboard. A tray of crystal glassware shattered, the shards raining down like diamonds onto the carpet. "Elias, Elias, Elias," Marcus said, his voice dripping with forced concern. He turned to the board, his face a mask of tragedy. "You see? This is what I was telling you. The pressure, it has broken him. He is a genius, yes, but a genius who has lost his grip on reality. He is a danger to himself and to this merger. He is stealing the IP," Elias screamed, struggling against David's grip. "Check the Cayman Shell beta logs. He's liquidating everything." Thomas Clark shook his head, looking at his dead father's business maxim engraved on his cufflinks. "As my old man used to say, Elias, a captain who can't hold his ship doesn't deserve the sea. You look like a vagrant. Marcus is the one holding the wheel." Marcus stepped forward, sliding a leather-bound folder across the table. "Elias, look at me. It's over. But I want to take care of you. This is a truce, a severance. Sign this, and you get $50,000 and a clean exit. We can end this scene right now, before the police arrive. For the sake of what we built, just sign." Elias looked at the folder. He looked at the board members who were nodding in agreement, and at the guards closing in. He was exhausted. His mind was a blur of lost seconds and red error messages. He just wanted the noise to stop. He grabbed a pen from the table, his hand shaking, and scrawled his name on the line. Subverted Beat 3.5. Phase 1. Smart decision. Elias signed the document with a sense of grim pragmatism. He knew Marcus was a snake, but $50,000 was enough to hire a real legal team, buy a new laptop, and start the counteroffensive. By signing, he was de-escalating the physical threat and buying himself the one thing he always valued most: time. He would take the pittance, walk out with his dignity, and fight from the shadows. It was the logical move to survive a losing battle so he could win the war. Phase 2. False positive. Marcus smiled, that warm, fatherly smile that had fooled Elias for years. He closed the folder and handed it to Jennifer Davis, the notary. "Thank you, Elias. You've done the right thing for the team." Jennifer began her ritual, the heavy brass seal thumping onto the paper. Thump, thump, thump. The deep purple ink overlapping perfectly. Marcus signaled to David, who released his grip on Elias's collar. Elias straightened his shirt, feeling a wave of relief. The violence was over. He had a check coming. He could breathe. Phase 3. The cracked Jennifer Davis didn't hand Elias a copy. She handed the entire folder to Marcus. As she did, she looked at Elias, her eyes cold and rigid. "The signature stays within the box, Mr. Thorne. Precision is the only shield against ruin." Elias frowned. Why was she talking about precision now? He looked at the title on the back of the document as Marcus tucked it into his briefcase. It didn't say severance agreement. Phase 4. Full collapse. "Wait," Elias said, his voice a whisper. "Let me see that again." Marcus didn't look back. He adjusted his tie 3 times. "Jennifer, please explain the legal standing to our former colleague." Jennifer stood with her rigid, upright posture. "By signing the membership interest assignment agreement, you have legally transferred 51% of your total ownership to Mr. Sterling, effective immediately. The $50,000 was not a severance. It was the total purchase price for your entire life's work. You are no longer an employee, a shareholder, or a director of Nexus Stream. You have no right to the IP, no right to the premises, and no right to the name." Elias's world tilted. The truce was the final nail in his coffin. He hadn't bought time. He had sold his soul for the price of a mid-sized sedan. He had legally erased himself from his own history. The board members began to clap, a hollow, rhythmic sound that felt like it was coming from miles away. Marcus had leveraged Elias's desperation to make him sign away the very thing he was trying to protect. He was now a stranger in his own building, a man without a legacy, standing in a room full of people who had just watched him commit professional suicide. "Get him out of here," Marcus said, his voice cold. "He's trespassing." Security grabbed Elias by the arms. They didn't lead him out. They dragged him. They threw him through the kitchen, past the scorched butter and clanging pans, and out the service door into the alley. The rain was a torrential downpour now, cold and sharp. Elias hit the wet pavement, the gutter water soaking into his clothes. He watched as the black SUV pulled away, Marcus Sterling staring triumphantly through the tinted glass. Elias stood on the sidewalk of Congress Avenue, shivering, his pockets empty except for the silver hardware token. He looked at the massive public library across the street, a monument to a dead civilization. Wait, the hardware token. He pulled it out, the cold metal biting into his palm. Marcus thought he had everything because he had the papers. But Marcus wasn't a coder. He didn't understand that the root wasn't just a key. It was the heart. Elias walked into the library, his wet shoes squeaking on the marble floor. He found a public terminal in the back under a flickering fluorescent bulb. He clicked his stopwatch. He didn't need a lawyer. He needed a terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard, entering a sequence of commands that only the architect could know. The hardware token was still linked to the system's primary heartbeat. He didn't try to take the company back. Instead, he sent a single, final command. Terminate all processes. Self-destruct encryption. Key. Across town, in the server room, the blue lights turned a steady, mocking white. The code that Marcus had stolen began to eat itself, fragmenting into a billion pieces of useless data. The Nexus Stream protocol became a worthless brick of dead code. As the screen went black, a group of men in dark windbreakers burst into the Gilded Oak. They weren't private security. They were federal agents who had been monitoring the offshore transfers Elias had inadvertently triggered. Elias watched from the library window as the flashing lights of police cars reflected in the rain. He saw Marcus being led out in handcuffs, his plastic hair finally out of place. The company was gone. The wealth was gone. But as Elias walked out into the quiet Austin night, he clicked his stopwatch one last time. 0 seconds lost. He was free. He didn't have a title, but he had his integrity. And in a world of shifting variables, that was the only constant that mattered.